This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. One of the number one complaints we heard was how tough it was to access the paper online, like getting logged out of your account. And Alan acknowledged the issue. It still seems to frustrate subscribers. I mean, it's happened to me.
Well, I've had the same experience.
Council members, firefighters, residents.
The growth of nonprofits.
And at what point does that become non-productive?
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Elaine Cha. Today, we're talking about journalism here in the St. Louis area, where we get it, who's making and delivering it, and how it gets to us, including the form it takes. And we're focusing specifically on print journalism. Later in the hour, we'll dive into that from a regional perspective with guests who have decades of combined experience and insight. But first, we're going hyper-local. In August 2020, Randy Drlingus, Jamie Mowers, and Ken Tenshert were employees of the Webster-Kirkwood Times. In September the same year, they purchased the paper from its former publisher and became its new owners. And later that month, they relaunched the print issue of the Webster-Kirkwood Times just 6 months after the publication went online only, and in the still early stages of a pandemic with no clear end in sight. Despite the cost of everything going up, they're making it work, at least breaking even and sometimes even being in the black. Randy Drlingus, now the publisher, and Jamie Mowers, now the editor-in-chief, join us to reflect on the 3-year anniversary of their buying the paper, how they're making it work at a time when many papers have halted print editions and print's power and importance. Jamie and Randy, welcome to the studio of St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
Yes, we're so happy to be here today.
Now, as you reflect on these past 3 years, a lot has happened. What is most present in your mind? Are you happy that you took the plunge, Randy?
I'm extremely happy. I'm glad to be able to bring the newspaper back to the town that loves it. And I feel like things have been going as good as they possibly can.
Mm-hmm. Jamie, for your part, I mean, did it feel like a plunge?
Yes. Yes, it was a huge undertaking, but we knew that we had the people we needed on our team to be able to do this. And we also have been super grateful for everyone in the communities that we do serve, the Webster Groves area, Kirkwood area, and all of our surrounding communities. It's really their support and the support from all of the local businesses we get who advertise in our pages that we're able to keep doing what we do, and so we're very grateful for that.
So clearly, it's people who are making this work, especially at a time when many other papers they've stopped putting out print editions. How is it exactly, in your day-to-day, Randy, what are you doing to make this possible?
Well, we're focusing on getting the stories right, finding the important stories, finding the important features that people will like, and really bringing the community also into the newspaper itself. And they're part of the paper because of the stories we do are about them and everybody. And we just focus on that.
And how many people are we talking about in the population or the communities that you serve?
We have close to 30,000 home deliveries. We print roughly 36,000, which includes store stack deliveries, papers going to stores, restaurants, nursing homes, various places. Mm-hmm. So roughly about 35,000.
Yeah, and where is that printing actually happening?
That happens in Breeze, Illinois.
Okay.
So it's close to an hour away.
Okay, so it's still within sort of our region, within the area?
Generally,
okay.
Yes.
Now, what is it about print that makes it so important to provide the news in that way?
Well, it's a different experience than reading it online, first of all. It's a whole different type of experience. It's more comfortable, relaxed. It's on your own time more, and you don't get distracted. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is once it's in print, it's always in print. It's not going to change. You can't go back. Mm. And it's a solid, and that's why newspapers are held to higher standards than online news places because we are held to standards that they don't have to be held to.
And what makes that important, Randy? Like not being able to make adjustments?
And it's not really, it depends on what you mean by adjustments, but we find the real story and we present the real story. And that's basically it. We don't try to give it a slant to where this is how it should be.
Yeah.
This is how it is.
And Jamie, from your perspective as the editor-in-chief, what is important about print to you?
I would second everything that Randy has said. And I also, there's just something about when people get to hold that print copy while they're reading it. It's just not the same. And for me, I just think it's really, really neat. And I love hearing, when parents or people in the community tell me, oh my gosh, my kid was in the paper and I cut it out and I put it on the refrigerator. That's probably going to be there for years. And, that's so special to me because when I hear somebody say that, that makes me think this is why we're doing this.
Yeah.
This is still one of the reasons why we're doing this. And I also feel like online, it's very easy for people to breeze past a story or just read the headline and not really take it all in. But I feel like when people read print, they're more likely to stay with the story and actually read the full story. So I think that's really unique and I think that's really important too.
Right. So the content that is in the paper, how many staff are you working alongside?
So we have a very small staff, and everyone on our team, Randy will vouch for this as well, is doing the job of 3 to 4 people easily, including Randy, Kent, and myself. We have a total of 11 people. And that's, like I said, including us. So that's not very many people to get a tremendous amount of work done. But like I said, we have our team in place and we work very hard to be able to put out the paper each week.
Yeah. And you both were reporters before you became owners.
No, I was actually the creative director.
Oh, okay.
So I've been in graphic design my whole life. And
Right.
now I'm switching over into this because I've learned it since I've worked there for 20 years.
Yeah.
It became natural.
So was there anything unexpected about taking on the role of the publisher? Things that you never would have known?
Almost everything, to be honest with you. It's basically I've had to go from being a left brain person to now I'm a right brain person.
Okay.
And so that's kind of my own conflict, so to speak. But I'm learning everything's pretty much new as I'm going through it, whether it's accounting things, delivery drivers, the whole gamut.
Yeah.
There's just everything's new.
Is there anything about the printing process, Jamie, that you have learned?
So many things. It's kind of like Randy said, it's just been really eye-opening to go from just reporting to doing a little bit of everything and then overseeing everything. I think Randy would agree with me when I say we learn every day. We're still learning every day.
Randy, you had mentioned that one of the reasons that print is important is that you can get to the news, like what it is that is happening. Over the last few years, Jamie, can you talk about the role that the Webster-Kirkwood Times has played in the local journalism landscape, particularly when it comes to covering things that no one else is?
Yes. So one of the things that we do that we believe is very valuable and important to the communities that we're in and that we serve is by showing up and being present at school board meetings, city council meetings, and all of these meetings, whether it be municipal or school board oriented, because oftentimes we are the only media outlet who is able to be there, to send a reporter there. And so if it were not for us being there and sending reporters and photographers out in the community and to these meetings, there is no other way that people would be getting this news and the amount of detail that we bring to our reporting. If there's a huge issue, there might be, a TV news station there, or there might be a reporter pop in, but that's very time to time. It's very sporadic, and it's also, that just gets a very small clip. We're there week in, week out. We know our reporters on these beats know these issues, know the people that are involved, and we are really there providing in-depth coverage at a time when no one else can or has the resources to do so.
Mm-hmm. Is there a specific example of a story that your paper has published, since you all bought the paper, a story of impact that would not have otherwise been covered?
Yes, I think there are several examples of that. I would say the most recent example that comes to mind is in the city of Webster Groves. There's been a lot of controversy in recent months over the city terminating its collective bargaining agreement with the firefighters union that serves the city. And yes, there have been snippets here and there. Like I said, other media outlets sometimes pick up on the big stories. But again, it's that we are there every meeting. We're talking to council members, we're talking to firefighters, we're talking to the shop steward, we're talking to residents. We are really embedded within these communities, and I think that allows us to provide the best ongoing coverage of these issues that are important and have a big impact on everyone who lives, in the cities.
Mm-hmm. Randy, printing this paper is not without cost, right?
Correct.
In terms of how much a subscription is, and then how expensive it is to print, how does that work out?
Well, first of all, it's online. If we were only online, I just call that it would be very easy. It's harder to do what we do. It's harder to put out a print paper. And that's where, the community comes in, because we need a strong community that will read the paper. The businesses come in, they advertise, and the people that read the paper use those advertisers. That's why the advertisers keep advertising. And so it's a circle of everybody in the community that makes it all happen. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So with the 11 or so people that you're working with, how profitable is it, or is that the wrong question?
It is.
Okay.
It's, for me, the important thing for me is, so we have 11 in-house employees. We have 11 delivery drivers. We have 13 stringers. We have a guy who comes and cleans the office. And the main goal is to make sure everybody gets paid. Mm-hmm. And we're doing that.
Yeah.
And anything other than that is not in our view. It's great. But as long as we can make sure everybody's getting their paychecks and keep putting out the news and make everybody at our office have fun and be happy, then we're happy.
So being happy, give me very quickly, like something that has brought you joy in doing this work in the midst of a really difficult time for journalism overall, Jamie.
Yes, there are many joys. There is so much hard work, but there are many joys about this. Again, and for me, and I think Randy will touch on the same thing, but it's just about telling people's stories. It's about sharing the stories that people have with everybody else, your neighbors, your fellow community members. People are doing amazing things, bringing joy to the world in many ways. And I've always said everyone has a story, and it's our job to tell it. And I love being able to do that.
Yeah. Jamie Mowers is editor-in-chief of the Webster-Kirkwood Times, and Randy Drillingus is the Webster-Kirkwood Times publisher. Thank you both for coming in and catching us up today.
You're welcome. Thanks again for having us.
Thank you so much.
Coming up, we'll talk about the state and future of print journalism at the regional level. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.
Welcome back. I'm Elaine Cha. Back in March 2020, which was the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, this show took up a discussion about the state of print and web journalism. Much has changed locally since then, including another scale down of the Belleville News-Democrat's print edition, Lee Enterprises cutting most of its 77 newspapers to 3 editions per week, though not the Post-Dispatch yet, and Sauce Magazine's going all digital instead of doing digital and print. Given those realities, even a casual onlooker might say print, and so does print have a future? What's the outlook for reporters present and future amidst the struggles newspapers are facing coming out of the pandemic? And in spite of, or maybe thanks to, changes in how journalism is being made and delivered, are there silver linings that actually present new opportunities, be those in print or other forms? With us today for this journalism-themed roundtable discussion, we have Bill Freivogel, a Southern Illinois University Carbondale journalism professor and publisher of the Gateway Journalism Review. Bill worked for 34 years at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Bill, welcome.
Hi.
We also have Nicholas Phillips, senior editor at St. Louis Magazine. Nicholas, thanks for coming in again.
Hello.
And finally, last but not least, Linda Lockhart, a retired St. Louis journalist who's worked at newspapers around the Midwest, including the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. She also worked for the St. Louis Beacon and right here, St. Louis Public Radio. Linda, thanks for joining us today.
Happy to be here, Elaine.
So, Nicholas, let's begin with you. We just heard Jamie and Randy of the Webster-Kirkwood Times, that is, about the value of a print publication. Is the age of print media truly over?
No. End of segment.
Okay.
No, our subscribers love our print product, and it's going strong. Mm-hmm. We see the print versus digital divide as not a either or, but a both and. So we're still putting out our print magazine, and people love it, but we're also expanding out into different digital avenues, including newsletters. Mm-hmm. And it's going great. Shameless plug, you could go to stlmag.com and click on the newsletter tab and see all the ones we got. But no, I would say the print product is not dead. But people are on their phones a lot these days. And so we want to cater to those readers too.
Right. So for those who've not seen St. Louis Magazine, what does it look like? What's the format?
Oh, the print magazine?
Mm-hmm.
It's like a traditional magazine. There's the front of the book, which has all of our departments, and then toward the end we get toward what we call the feature well, and that's where we have our bigger, more in-depth stories or some service packages, which is like articles that help readers, like 50 best restaurants or things like that. And it really looks, I think, beautiful. Before I worked at the magazine, I would keep these things on my coffee table because they were just pretty to look at.
It's glossy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, we talked earlier in the intro, that is, about the Belleville News-Democrat. Bill, it is scaling down to its print to bring its print edition to limited run. And Lee Enterprises is cutting most of its 77 newspapers to 3 editions per week. And our local Post-Dispatch has not felt that as of yet. Then we have Sauce Magazine. Print no longer, all digital. What is the state of print media in St. Louis currently?
Well, even though I would agree that print together with other platforms is, combined together is the best way for a journalism organization to go. I mean, there's no question but that print has cratered since 2006. Here's a few statistics. In 2006, since 2006, circulation of print newspapers around the country has gone from 63 million to 25 million. 8 out of 10 people now get their news from mobile devices. Only 1 out of 3. This is nationwide. Only 1 out of 3 from print. Newsroom employment has gone down 60%. We've seen that happen at the Post-Dispatch, where the Post-Dispatch newsroom that Linda and I worked in had 300 plus editorial employees. Now they're below 100. So there's no question but that print is failing. I used to go out my front lawn in a neighborhood with about 20 houses, and there were almost everybody had a Post-Dispatch. Now there are about 3 of us.
Yeah. Linda, how does it look from your perspective?
Well, unfortunately, it looks pretty bleak. I think before we started the show, Bill and I were talking about, how much time do we give it? And if we look at, the decline, the question really is how many people will be left before they turn the lights out? I think one of the things that you talked about with Webster-Kirkwood Times people and setting up this show was the good reporters and editors are either being laid off or leaving. And so there's a lot of newer people that don't know the territory. So many things are jobbed out. The editor staff, copy editors, and editors who would know St. Louis have been laid off. And so the quality of the publications is going down, yet the costs are going up. And so they're asking people to pay more for less every day, and that's very disappointing. And so I don't know. I never thought that the Post-Dispatch would be down to what the numbers you said, Bill, under 50,000 circulation daily. And at what point does that become non-productive?
Yeah. Bill, you had said 2006. And
Yeah.
for a lot of people, they might be thinking that's forever ago, right? I mean, what is it about what is happening now? And then also given that a publication like the St. Louis American has continued to stay in print, what's the difference?
Well, the reason I said 2006 is that's when the newspaper industry fell off a cliff. It's also, for those of us in St. Louis, we remember it as the time we left the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. St. Louis Post-Dispatch sold to Lee Enterprises, for $1.6 billion. It's not worth anything like that anymore. I loved hearing Jamie and all talking about a successful employee buyout. We tried to have an employee buyout at the Post-Dispatch before leaving. It was really the worst idea that some friends of mine and I came up with. Because if we had bought something worth $1.6 billion in 2006, we would have spent the rest of our time laying off our friends from their jobs.
Nicholas, from your perspective, with the print magazine that you have, I mean, how expensive is it to be in print, and what are the savings that an outlet can reasonably expect by being online only?
Oh, I think they're significant because paper costs are up. So yes, they're significant. But 10 years ago, I don't think digital ad revenue was much of a thing, but it's becoming more significant. And I'm not on that side of the organization, so I can't really speak too much to that. But I can tell you that we're bullish on where this is all going.
Yeah. Well, and in terms of paper costs, I nodded because one of the things that I've been able to do is be part of the publishing of the Humans of St. Louis book. And that was delayed because paper costs went up, and this was during the pandemic period. Yeah. Yes, Linda.
And if I could add to that, sort of what Bill was saying, and the cost of newsprint, those things were contributed to the downfall of newspapers. The cost of newsprint skyrocketed. The advertising tanked as we lost display ads, department store ads, grocery store ads. They all went to individual mailers. And so the revenue was down too. And so then that's where, you have the layoff cycle going on. And so that's why I say it's bleak that people aren't looking at a daily paper like the Post-Dispatch, because they're going to the Webster-Kirkwood Times to find out what's going on in their school district, what's going on in their city council, things that the daily paper is no longer covering.
Yeah. And what about the funding model in terms of being able to raise revenue via print versus digital, do they raise the same amount of money, Bill?
Well, I think in relation to funding models, the big change that's happened is the growth of nonprofits. I mean, in 2009, the INN was formed. St. Louis Beacon, my wife, who was the editor at that point, was at the meeting where that happened. There were about 10 or 20 organizations. Now there are 400. So
Wow.
that's a nationwide number again. So there's been a tremendous growth of nonprofits, and of course that's very relevant to what you're doing today, for raising money for this nonprofit.
Sure.
So the St. Louis Beacon was something that we started. It then merged with St. Louis Public Radio and was a newsroom with a lot of power when big events like Ferguson occurred, as you'll remember, Linda, and gave it the firepower in the newsroom to cover that story. So the growth of nonprofits like St. Louis Public Radio has really been the story of the last 10 years in journalism.
Nicholas, you were nodding when we were talking earlier with Bill about funding, about nonprofits.
Oh, I just think that they're it's a fantastic idea. I mean, you guys are in a pitch drive right now, right?
Yes, we are. Very much so.
So I'm sure listeners know too. I love all these different things, and I don't know whether we're all going that way or not. But I mean, we're locally owned and operated, and we're doing fine as a
Right.
business. But like we also have a different cadence of publication and a much smaller operation than the Post, which came from this giant organization. I think that's one of the reasons why it looks a certain way at the Post is that it used to be huge. If they had started today with like 4 or 5 incredible
Right.
reporters in a garage or something, and like built off those, like, I hate to say it, but like individual reporter brands, that might be a different story because it's super lean. But because they come from that big organization, it looks less than optimal.
But the other side of that, too, is though there may be more nonprofits, but there's more people asking for money. And so there are more voices that are asking for contributions and donations. And so it doesn't mean that, individual is going to get more money.
We need to take a quick break here, but we'll be back shortly to continue this conversation. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.
Let's return to our conversation about the state, value, and future of print journalism in the St. Louis area. And here to talk with us, we have Nicholas Phillips, senior editor at St. Louis Magazine, Linda Lockhart, a recent retired St. Louis journalist who's worked at newspapers around the Midwest, including right here in St. Louis at St. Louis Public Radio and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and Bill Freivogel, a Southern Illinois University Carbondale journalism professor and publisher of the Gateway Journalism Review. Now, before the break, we were talking about the nonprofit journalism model, and in fact, we'll be exploring that a little more next week with University of Illinois professor Brant Houston, who's the author of Changing Models for Journalism, Reinventing the Newsroom. That'll be next Tuesday at noon. We want to hear from you before that show. How have your news habits changed? What do you pay for? Leave us a voicemail at 314-516-6397. That's 314-516-6397. Or you can send us an email at talk@stlpr.org. Now, on that note of paying for journalism, I'd love to hear what you all think about the way people interact with, or don't, with paywalls. Nick?
Yes. Well, I'm not a fan of that term paywall. It sounds like some sort of fortress, So subscription, I think, is probably a better term. But look, I mean, Elaine, it is. If I were to say to you, "Hey, Elaine, there sounds like there was some kind of criminal event downtown. Would you go ahead and spend 3 days figuring out what happened and leveraging all the relationships you've built up over the years that you've been here, and then write it, edit it, send it to me, and you know what? I don't think I'm going to pay you for that. That's crazy.
But that's the expectation.
That's the expectation because I think, for historical reasons, I think the advertising models in the old days were you had a lot of businesses basically subsidizing serious journalism through the classifieds and stuff like that. And I mean, and you both know all about this, and that is now that those things can happen online on the internet without the middleman of the newspaper or magazine.
Right.
Things have changed.
Linda.
Well, definitely, I do see it as a wall that keeps people out and limits accessibility. And because people have so many options of where to get their news and less options of what they can get from their local news, people do go looking. And so, if I go to the New York Times or the Washington Post or even the Kansas City Star-Tribune, and I can see a headline and maybe the first couple of sentences, but I can't read the story, I'm not going to pay for all those other sources. I'm going to move on to somebody that, doesn't charge me. And so I think that I understand that you have to get paid for the products you receive, but I also don't think that it's really the answer for getting more news to more people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's also the issue of whether you can get to what you have paid for with subscriptions. We had St. Louis Post-Dispatch editor Alan Achkar on this show last year when he took on that role. We invited listener questions, and one of the number one complaints we heard was how tough it was to access the paper online, like getting logged out of your account. And Alan acknowledged the issue. And it still seems to frustrate subscribers. I mean, it's happened to me when I'm trying to do some research. Bill, I mean, what have you heard about this?
Well, I've had the same experience. And, I understand Nick's point about somebody's got to pay for the reporters if we want to have well-sourced news stories. And so, but I guess I'm a hypocrite in general. I will not pay for a paywall unless it's absolutely necessary. So I'll do almost anything to get around a paywall. Mm-hmm. I'll do a LexisNexis search for news, all the newspapers in the United States to get a particular story rather than pay for it. Yeah. I'm not saying this is a really, very correct attitude, but I think it's sort of human nature.
Right.
And the average reader doesn't have that access to LexisNexis. They don't know where to go. Mm-hmm. And it also speaks to, the paid subscriptions for the physical papers, that circulation continues to drop for one reason, because people can't get that paper. It used to be you had this saturation delivery and the guy would throw the paper to every house on the block, like, I think Bill said earlier. And now if you've only got 3 houses on the block that are receiving a paper, it's less cost effective for just the delivery guy. Mm-hmm. Things like the Webster-Kirkwood Times and papers that are free throw it on every doorstep, and maybe everybody doesn't read it, but it gets out to more people.
Right.
So that's leaving things at the grocery store like the St. Louis American. Those things people can get access to if they want it, but it's not having to pay a driver to deliver papers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and Bill, I agree with what you said there. I look at a donation to St. Louis Public Radio or a subscription to the Post-Dispatch or us as a civic act, and I hope people see it that way, because that's really what what this is.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
But I've had my own tricks. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And Bill, how is it that the pandemic affected news and media outlets in the region?
Well, I was just hearing you all on the air talking about how you have not had your finances bounce back. I have seen. There was a little bit of pandemic relief that helped some of the sort of small print papers around the country. I was actually trying to research this a little bit, but I don't think it was. I don't think it was good for anybody, really.
Mm-hmm. I mean, how much of this? And I don't remember which of you mentioned the person coming around to deliver papers. That used to be something that kids did. It was a first job. So, I mean, to what extent is the way that we're talking about, there are more nonprofits looking for smaller and smaller pots of money from the same, entities or institutions. But how much of what's happening with print journalism has to do with a change in a culture around print, around journalism, around that kind of information coming to us? Linda?
That's a very good question, Elaine, because some of us, many of us of a certain age, we grew up with a newspaper in our homes. Our parents subscribed to 1 or 2 or 3 papers and several magazines. That's not happening now. And so, even my children, who are millennials and Gen X's, they're not having a paper come to their home. They're not teaching their children to look for the paper every day. So we're losing, people are going online, but again, you're not getting the same depth because, again, you might just be reading the first 2 or 3 paragraphs online, and if you stumble across something that's, doesn't work for you, you move on. I think everybody counts time on page and time in story. And people aren't reading the whole story the way we would read a whole newspaper story, the way Jamie talked about.
Mm-hmm. No, Nicholas, with St. Louis Magazine, there are those who subscribe, so they're getting the magazine on a regular basis. I mean, to what extent is it what we're talking about as far as like a habit and raising up sort of a new generation of readers, something that you all think about as you continue to put out the print edition of St. Louis Magazine?
That's a great question. There is a certain amount of time someone's going to spend on their phone or their tablet reading a story, a news story. It's probably pretty short. And I think that the technology urges them to move to the next shiny object, right? But the book industry is going well. Like I said, we're doing great. I think there's a certain kind of person who's always going to be there who would rather hold that thing in their hands and read it on the paper. I'm certainly that way.
Right.
Like I said, I think a lot of people are in this mindset of just glancing at their phones when they're waiting in line for the grocery store or whatever. And I think that's where I want them to read my newsletter. That's where I want them to read George Mahy and Dining, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
All our newsletters. Yeah.
Even as the issue is right there in the grocery aisle.
I hope they buy it, but if they don't want to,
right.
that's fine.
Bill, with the students that you are encountering at SIU, to what extent are they coming into journalism thinking about these things? And are they coming with questions that you might not necessarily have the answers to?
I guess that's true. They're coming in. They're coming in fewer numbers. We have a big decline in the number of people who are interested in becoming journalists. But what we are trying to teach them, and not always successfully, is that it's an entirely different. Now there's a deadline every minute. Every time a news event happens, they should be trying to get it out first online, then social media, then in the print edition of the paper, which even though we're called the Daily Egyptian, comes out now only once a week, and sometimes it's hard to get the students to buy into that kind of urgency.
Okay, so social media is first. And then it is
online first, then social media, then print. Print last.
Mm-hmm. Linda, you have a lot of experience in community engagement, and this has become something that more and more people are talking about. What are your thoughts on the opportunities that digital media presents in terms of audience engagement with newsrooms, sort of following on what Bill has mentioned?
Well, I almost feel like sometimes, we thought it was a great idea 10 years ago, but it's still getting people who are talking about the issues that they care about, that they're passionate about, and the vitriol and the sort of off the top of the head, foaming at the mouth, responding in Twitter or, X, responding, to a Facebook post is not really a healthy conversation. When you can engage people and, invite them here to the studio for a conversation, not to the studio, but, for a community room where you can really have people talking seriously. We can think back 20, 30 years ago when newspapers had, the tip line or the call-in line, and people would just call in and rant. It wasn't like letters to the editor that could get edited and vetted and printed. And so there's as many downsides, I think, to community engagement if you're talking about social media as there are advantages.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of vitriol, one of the online outlets that has the greatest penetration in St. Louis is probably somebody that most people haven't heard of, the Gateway Pundit. They have 10 times more engagement with St. Louisans than St. Louis Today. And this is the outfit that reported that poll workers in Atlanta had rigged the election. So not a very reliable source of news.
But then you have to know what you're looking for. There are so many sources, so many outlets, so much competition, and people tend to gravitate to voices that reflect their opinion. So back when we had the Post-Dispatch and the Globe Democrat, there were at least two voices, and people could read one and the other and then try and make up their own mind. Now we just look for things that reinforce what we already believe, whether it's on the right or the left.
Nicholas, you mentioned newsletters being a major journalism tool for reaching audiences earlier. How much engagement does St. Louis Magazine foster through newsletters?
Oh, a lot. Those are growing. I mean, I think a year or two ago we weren't doing any, and now I think we have almost a dozen. And just in my example, it sounds like something that might be kind of I don't know, trivial, but it's absolutely not. Like in my case, we had this insight last year that whereas in the traditional model of journalism, you would focus on the problems, there's this new approach called solutions journalism where you focus on the problems and the solutions. And so I have a whole newsletter dedicated to that. And it goes out, we could put that in the print magazine, and we do. But if you send it through a newsletter, it's direct. We're not relying on Facebook. We're not relying on any of the social media. It's direct, and it kind of creates this loyal following that I really enjoy. Personally, there's a lot of engagement.
Nicholas Phillips is senior editor at St. Louis Magazine. Bill Freivogel is a journalism professor at Southern Illinois University Carbondale and publisher of the Gateway Journalism Review. And Linda Lockhart is a retired St. Louis journalist who's worked many years at newspapers throughout the Midwest, including the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. She also worked for the St. Louis Beacon and right here at St. Louis Public Radio. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
This episode was produced by Elaine Shaw.
Our audio engineer is Aaron Dorr. This podcast was mixed and edited by Aaron.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
St. Louis on the Air proudly supports local artists by using music from Life Creative Group.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.